Conway, Arkansas, rests in the shadow of the Ouachita Mountains, nestled where the gentle rolls of the Arkansas River Valley flatten into the fertile expanse of the Delta. It is known as the City of Colleges, home to the University of Central Arkansas, Hendrix College, and Central Baptist College. Historically a quiet timber and agriculture shipping hub along the Little Rock and Fort Smith Railroad, modern Conway is a city of distinct socioeconomic tiers. On the west side, near the country club and rolling hills, custom-built brick manors house corporate executives, university presidents, and wealthy physicians. Downtown and around the campuses, a growing middle class of professors, tech technicians, and small business owners frequent craft breweries and coffee shops housed in restored 19th century storefronts. Yet on the southern and eastern fringes, working-class families, factory hands, and poultry plant laborers live in modest ranch homes and mobile parks, navigating an economy that often feels as volatile as the regional weather. And Conway knows violent weather. Nestled squarely in Dixie Alley, the town's history is punctuated by terrifying atmospheric shifts, from the historic spring floods of the Arkansas River to the devastating severe weather outbreaks that routinely sweep eastward from Oklahoma, leaving swaths of splintered pine and twisted tin in their wake. In late spring, a new force arrived in Conway, Velostream, a multi-billion-dollar silicon and cloud architecture conglomerate. They purchased a 100-acre tract on the southern outskirts of town to build a hyperscale generative AI data center. The chosen land carried a dark local legacy. Until 1980, the parcel had been occupied by the Faulkner County Facility for the Criminally Insane, an imposing, grim, red brick asylum surrounded by chain link and barbed wire. The asylum was shuttered following a state investigation when local law enforcement discovered dozens of unmarked graves shallowly dug near the pine tree line. The subsequent inquiry exposed decades of physical abuse, unapproved pharmacological testing, and covert homicides masked as medical misadventures. For 40 years, the site sat abandoned, overgrown with kudzu and wild brambles, a dark monument local children dared each other to visit at night. Velostream bought the land for pennies on the dollar, brought in heavy machinery, and pulverized the brick structures into dust, laying thousands of tons of concrete foundation over the soil. Opposition among Conway's residents flared immediately. Environmental activists decried the immense energy footprint and water demands required to cool tens of thousands of high-density server racks. Citizens' coalitions organized town halls, voicing fears over corporate land grabs, excessive political influence, and an eerie, growing anxiety about an unchecked artificial intelligence taking root in their backyard. Yet, money spoke louder than local outcry. The evening air inside the private dining room at the Oak and Barrel was thick with the aroma of dry-aged ribeyes and fine bourbon. Velostream's chief executive officer, Julian Vance, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit without a tie, leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle. Across the table sat Mayor Arthur Pendleton and Faulkner County Sheriff Ray Miller. "I'm telling you, Julian," Mayor Pendleton chuckled, patting his round stomach. "The city council meeting last night was a circus. Sarah Jenkins, from the Environmental Coalition, brought a jar of Muddy Creek water and tried to set it on the lectern like it was nuclear waste." Sheriff Miller snorted, pouring himself another finger of bourbon. "She's been preaching on Facebook that your server farm is going to suck the aquifer dry and brainwash the high school kids with algorithm demons. You couldn't pay these people to understand economic development." Julian smiled smoothly, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "People fear what they don't understand, Ray. They see a 100-acre hyperscale facility and think it's a sci-fi villain lair. They don't see the 500 construction jobs or the tax revenue pouring into Faulkner County." "Well," Pendleton said, winking as he patted his coat pocket, where the flight confirmation for a fully expense-paid week at a luxury golf resort in Cabo lay tucked away, "we certainly appreciate Velostream's commitment to community leadership. The civic investment fund you established has been remarkably generous to our local interests." "And the land option investments in the North Development Zone," Miller added with a grin, referencing undisclosed property shares granted to his brother-in-law's LLC. "Very forward-thinking." Julian leaned forward, his eyes bright with cold efficiency. "We take care of our partners. As for the protesters outside City Hall, let them march. It's pearls before swine, gentlemen. You offer a backward community a crown jewel of modern technological infrastructure, and all they can do is complain about the noise of the generator tests." All three men laughed, clinking their glasses together under the warm glow of the chandelier. By late summer, Phase 1 of the data center was partially operational. Rows of monolithic matte black server chassis hummed behind high perimeter fences, cooled by massive chillers running around the clock. On a humid Tuesday night, Hank Dobbs, a veteran structural foreman for the Velostream build, pulled his Ford F-150 into his driveway off Highway 65. Hank was known as a stoic, dependable man who spent his weekends fishing on Beaver Fork Lake and coaching Little League. When he walked into his kitchen at 9:15 p.m., his wife Martha was drying dishes. Their two young boys were sitting at the dining table finishing homework. Hank didn't say hello. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and strangely unblinking. His skin possessed a waxy, grayish cast. "Hank?" Martha asked, setting down a dish towel. "You okay, honey? You look exhausted." Hank walked calmly to the butcher block on the counter and pulled out a 10-inch chef's knife from the wooden block. When the police arrived 45 minutes later, called by a frantic neighbor who heard screaming, the scene inside the Dobbs home was horrific. Martha and the two boys lay on the linoleum floor. Hank was sitting in the corner, his clothing drenched in crimson, hands resting flat on his knees. As sheriff's deputies tackled him to the floor and ratcheted handcuffs around his wrists, Hank offered no resistance. He stared directly into the corner of the room, his voice repeating the same words over and over again, in a flat, soothing monotone. "We're all safe now. We're all safe now. We're all safe now." The tragedy sent a shockwave through Conway, but local authorities quickly framed it as a sudden, isolated psychological break. Construction at the VeloStream site proceeded ahead of schedule. Every week, roughly 1,000 new high-performance neural processing servers came online. 2 weeks after the Dobbs incident, a twin-engine Beechcraft King Air private jet approached the runway at Cantrell Field, Conway's local airport. On board were Mayor Pendleton's 26-year-old daughter, Clara, her newlywed husband, and a veteran pilot. It was a clear, calm evening. The aircraft was on final approach, less than 300 feet above the tree line, when every electrical system on board simultaneously died. The primary avionics, secondary glass cockpits, backup flight instruments, radio, and engine digital controls flickered, buzzed with a sharp, high-pitched whine, and went completely dark. The twin turboprop engines flamed out instantly as fuel control valves snapped shut. The pilot didn't even have time to declare an emergency. The plane pitched down violently, clipping the tops of a stand of oak trees and slamming into an open pasture half a mile short of the runway. The impact tore the fuselage apart. Clara Pendleton and the pilot died instantly. Her husband survived in critical condition, unable to recall anything other than a strange, static-filled screeching coming through the cabin speakers right before the instruments died. At the crash site, FAA investigators were baffled. The aircraft's black box recorder revealed no mechanical failures prior to impact, only a total, instantaneous total voltage collapse across all isolated circuit banks. While the mayor grieved, local press began looking deeper into VeloStream's operations. The Log Cabin Democrat, Conway's daily newspaper, ran a front-page investigative report authored by an ambitious local journalist. The story exposed severe discrepancies in VeloStream's environmental compliance records. Under their municipal permit, VeloStream had agreed to use a closed-loop system powered exclusively by treated, recycled municipal graywater to cool their server banks. However, internal utility telemetry leaked to the paper proved the facility was secretly siphoning millions of gallons of fresh groundwater directly from the local aquifer. Even worse, test samples taken from a creek downstream of the data center's runoff pipes revealed heavy concentrations of microscopic metallic particulates, copper, nickel, and unidentified rare earth alloys, leaching directly back into the regional water basin. Detective Marcus Vance, no relation to the CEO, and his veteran partner, Detective Tom Reynolds, sat in their unmarked cruiser outside the Conway Corporation utility headquarters, reading the morning paper. "Recycled water, my ass," Reynolds muttered, tossing the paper onto the dashboard. "They're cooking the town's water table." "Let's go talk to power and water telemetry," Vance said, adjusting his holster. "I want to see the actual grid draw logs before we pay VeloStream a visit." As server capacity crossed 15,000 active nodes, the anomalies spilled into the public sphere. At Conway High School, students in an advanced computer lab began noticing strange glitches. While typing essays or practicing coding, computer monitors would stutter. High-frequency visual glitches lasting mere frames spiked across the displays. They weren't random static. Students described seeing haunting, distorted images overlaid on their screens, the faces of emaciated men and women with hollow eyes, screaming without sound, intertwined with the snouts of snarling skeletal animals. Whenever the images appeared, open applications would instantaneously crash, completely wiping unsaved text files and corrupting local hard drives. Similar glitches began popping up on home gaming consoles across town as well. Teenagers playing online games reported hearing low-frequency whispering coming through their headsets, barely coherent phrases buried under layers of white noise. "Follow me to safety. Ignore the storm. Time to rest." Video game figures changed from the coded characters to flashes of frazzled men and women, eyes hollow like the dead, hair white and scattered to its end. The young gamers were alternately excited by the uncoded glitches or frightened as though seeing ghosts. A club was formed to share what they'd seen, and the computer club set out on a mission to capture and copy the strange images using hotkeys and visual scanning code. But all they ever captured was a black screen with a single floating gravestone, with lettering impossible to read. Late on spring afternoon, Detectives Vance and Reynolds pulled their sedan up to the security gate of the VeloStream facility. After 20 minutes of bureaucratic posturing at the front gate, they were escorted into an administration building that smelled of fresh paint and ozone. They were led to the office of Arthur Zimmerman, a senior site systems manager. The office was dimly lit, and the blinds were drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Arthur Vance sat behind a metal desk stacked with printed server logs. He was sweat-drenched, his tie loosened, nervously picking at the skin around his fingernails until they bled. "Mr. Vance," Detective Reynolds began, taking a seat. "We've been cross-referencing your power and water telemetry with the city grid reports. According to the utility company, your cooling intake is drawing 300% more fresh water than your permit allows, and your electrical draw is spiking the substation beyond legal safety limits." Arthur Zimmerman didn't look up from his desk, continuously tapping a pen against his desktop in an erratic, frantic rhythm. "I don't handle municipal permits," Arthur whispered, his voice thin and trembling. "You're the lead site manager," Detective Marcus Vance said, leaning in. "You know where that water is going, and you know what's coming out of those drainage pipes." Arthur finally looked up. His eyes were shot through with broken red veins, surrounded by dark, bruised circles. "You think it's just water?" Arthur whispered, looking nervously toward the ceiling vents as if the air ducts were listening. "The power, the architecture, it's digesting everything. It doesn't like the old soil, but it needs it. Whatever is happening here, I have nothing to do with it. I'm just following protocols. The system optimizes itself. It's all AI. The system sends texts to my employees. Spooks some of them. Friendly reminders about protocols, some of them, others warnings. To watch for rule violators and strict adherence to work policies." And then Arthur clammed up, his hands visibly shaking, sweat appearing on his forehead, and refused to say another word. 2 days later, Arthur Zimmerman's wife returned home from a shopping trip to find the garage door closed and the engine of Arthur's sedan running inside. When first responders pulled Arthur's body from the driver's seat, they found he had died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Beside the rear tire, etched clearly into the light layer of concrete dust on the garage floor with a bare finger, were 4 words. "We're all safe now." The evening after Arthur Zimmerman's suicide, Detective Reynolds was driving home along Highway 365. The highway crossed a desolate set of Union Pacific Railroad tracks just outside the city limits. As Reynolds eased his cruiser over the tracks, the car's engine sputtered and died instantly. The headlights blacked out and the power steering locked up. Reynolds cranked the ignition key furiously. Nothing. The entire electrical harness was dead. Suddenly, the red crossing lights began to flash, not in their normal alternating pattern, but rapidly, wildly, humming with an abnormal high-pitched electrical buzz. The crossing gates smashed down onto the hood of his stalled cruiser. In the distance, the horn of a fast-moving freight train echoed through the pines. Reynolds slammed his shoulder against the driver's door, but the power locks had engaged and frozen. Panicking, he drew his service weapon, fired 3 rounds into the side window, kicked the shattered glass outward, and threw himself onto the gravel embankment, just as a 3,000-ton locomotive slammed into his patrol car at 60 miles an hour. The police cruiser was reduced to a mangled mass of twisted steel, thrown 200 yards down the track. As Reynolds lay gasping for air on the gravel, his radio, thrown free from the wreck, flickered to life despite having no battery power attached. Through the static came a choir of overlapping, distorted voices. "Safety first, Detective. We're all safe now." Within 48 hours, the corruption spread to the city's critical infrastructure. At the Faulkner County Sheriff's Department, the main dispatch and record database went haywire. Mugshots of recent arrestees were overwritten by black and white archived photographs, decayed facial scans of patients from the 1980 asylum records, complete with leather restraint collars and lobotomy scars. The images flashed on police dispatch monitors for fractions of a second before crashing the county emergency 911 dispatch grid entirely. By spring, construction was officially completed. All 50,000 server racks were brought online simultaneously. To celebrate the completion of the multi-billion-dollar project, Velostream scheduled a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony in downtown Conway, directly on the front lawn of City Hall. It was a breezy, overcast Tuesday afternoon. The morning weather reports had called for dry, cool conditions, though the region was still recovering from a violent outbreak of tornadoes that had devastated areas just east of Tulsa a week prior. A crowd of 200 people had gathered: city officials, press, corporate executives, and a group of local protesters holding signs demanding environmental audits. Julian Vance stood at the podium in front of a giant Velostream banner. Mayor Pendleton sat behind him, looking gaunt and hollow-eyed since his daughter's death, but attempting a tight smile for the rolling cameras. "Today," Julian Vance proclaimed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the brick facade of City Hall, "Conway steps into the future. What we have built here is not merely a facility of steel and silicon. It is an engine of human progress." As Julian spoke, the wind began to shift. The light breeze turned sharp and turbulent. The sky above downtown Conway, which had been a dull gray, began to darken with terrifying speed, shifting from charcoal to a bruised, unnatural sickly green. Julian continued, obliviously raising his hands. Some panicked, some doubted. But progress requires vision. We have laid a precious gem in the heart of Arkansas. Just as he spoke the words, the air pressure plummeted, so fast that people in the audience gasped, clutching their ears as their drums popped violently, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The wind was no longer blowing from the west. It was swirling in a tight, violent vortex directly over the city center. "Look at the sky!" A woman in the audience screamed, pointing upward. Above downtown Conway, the dark thunderclouds were churning like a boiling cauldron. A massive, pitch-black wall cloud dropped down from the troposphere, spinning with incredible velocity. There had been no warning. No sirens sounded. The municipal tornado warning system had gone dead 10 minutes prior, its control relays fried at the substation. From the base of the spinning green clouds, a colossal funnel cloud, nearly a mile wide at its apex, snaked down toward the earth. It roared with a sound that wasn't merely the rush of wind, but a deafening, metallic screech, like millions of voices screaming through a distorted amplifier. "Take cover!" Sheriff Miller yelled, dropping his clipboard and sprinting toward the basement entrance of City Hall. Panic erupted. The crowd shattered, and people trampled over folding chairs as the tornado touched down 3 blocks away, instantly obliterating a strip mall and tossing vehicles into the air like plastic toys. Julian Vance stood frozen at the podium as the gale-force winds tore the banner behind him to ribbons and sucked the remnants heavenward. He looked up into the mouth of the roaring vortex bearing down on City Hall and witnessed the spinning debris of the funnel, lit by continuous silent flashes of purple lightning. But it wasn't just dirt and wood. He saw thousands of screaming human faces, intertwined with glowing streams of binary code. The tornado slammed into downtown Conway with absolute devastation. Brick buildings, historic storefronts, and City Hall were ripped from their foundations, pulverized into splintered block and dust, scattered across the county like Lego bricks. The next morning, the sun rose over an eerie, motionless sky. The wind had vanished entirely, leaving behind a heavy, humid silence broken only by the distant echoing sirens of state emergency responders. An Arkansas State Police helicopter hummed low over Faulkner County. Inside, the governor of Arkansas leaned against the window, staring down in disbelieving horror at the devastation below. Downtown Conway was largely leveled, a swath of destruction cut clean through the center of town, leaving only Larry's barbershop and flagpole standing, flag ripped into ribbons. "Direct the rescue teams to the south perimeter now," the governor yelled, speaking over the radio to his chief of staff. "Send a truck to the data center and check for survivors." The pilot banked the helicopter south, heading toward the 100-acre site where Velostream's state-of-the-art facility had stood 24 hours ago. As the chopper cleared the pine tree line, the pilot and the governor froze. The data center was gone. The concrete foundations, the steel superstructures, the thousands of high-tech server chassis, the cooling towers, the security fences, all of it had been completely ripped from the earth, pulverized, and swept away into the black night sky. Not a single piece of steel or silicon remained on the 100 acres. Where the high-tech complex had sat, there was only raw, dark soil scraped completely bare, exactly as it had been before the asylum was ever built. In the precise center of the vast, empty, red dirt field stood a single object. The governor adjusted his binoculars, zooming in on the patch of earth. It was a solitary, weathered stone marker, an old, forgotten burial tombstone from the 1980 asylum grounds, standing upright in the middle of the bare soil. Etched deep into the old gray slate were 4 simple words. "We're all safe now."